Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the surprise album from Kendrick Lamar called Untitled, Unmastered. But first, let's talk a little bit about performance art, and Kendrick Lamar specifically. Now, I don't think that anybody could deny, even if you're not a Kendrick Lamar fan, that he hasn't made a considerable impact on modern hip-hop, and not just on record. Indeed, one thing that's always stood out for me is how strong of a live performer he is. Bring the same sort of visceral energy he has on record in some pretty potent songs with impressive stagecraft. Put it another way, very few artists would dare perform a song as visceral or as political as The Blacker the Berry at the Grammys. You could easily make the argument that Kendrick takes his live performances as opportunities to craft unique and incendiary artistic statements outside of just the music, showing a rare gift for theater that I at least really appreciate. And nowhere is that more apparent than the Untitled series. For those of you who aren't aware, through a series of live shows, Kendrick Lamar has been slipping in tracks that nobody recognized from any album. They had no name or recorded version. The only time you could hear them is if you found a live video of the performance. In other words, the very definition of modern performance art. And while I doubted they were free-form pieces that Kendrick Lamar was just coming up with off the top of his head mid-performance, they were very much unique in their presentation, to the point where it might have been inevitable for them to be bundled and sold eventually. I almost didn't want that. There's something intangible about the live spontaneity of the performance that truly felt special. And then to put it all on wax, well, would the energy be the same? Would they have the same sort of magic behind them? Well, now it's time to test that theory, because out of nowhere and out of character for him, Kendrick Lamar released a surprise album called Untitled, Unmastered, containing 8 of these mysterious unnamed tracks. And because it's Kendrick Lamar, everybody online promptly lost their minds. Now, to me, I had significantly lower expectations. Not just that these might not capture the spark of the performance, but might just end up being a collection of glorified B-sides not good enough to land on To Pimp a Butterfly or Good Kid, Mad City. So, was I right about that assumption? Well, okay, here's the thing. Almost by design, this album sets itself up to hedge against expectations. Hell, it's indicative in the title. It wasn't set up to be as elaborate or cohesive as To Pimp a Butterfly. It's looser, rough around the edges, with the sort of track fragments that, in the hands of a lesser rapper, would feel like leftovers. And yes, on some level, they still are, but points must be given to Kendrick for not just being able to create something not just workable, but genuinely thought-provoking with this project, if only in fragments. I wouldn't put this up with any of his best projects as not better than To Pimp a Butterfly or Good Kid, Mad City, but it certainly is good, maybe even great, easily outstripping what many rappers could do with even some of their best efforts. So I could start off with Kendrick Lamar himself, but really, what is there to say about him at this point? Excellent multi-syllabic flows and bars that he can change up without warning, a really expressive delivery that can bring both fire and smoothness when necessary. Again, these are leftovers that still have more memorable lines, personality, and concepts than most entire albums, the sort of lyrical hip-hop that I've always loved and will always support. All that being said, you can also tell that outside of certain moments on Untitled 1 and Untitled 5, Kendrick isn't nearly as visceral as he could be. You're not getting the Blacker the Berry here. And look, I get why he was hopping on Drake's flows on Untitled 2 and part of 7. He's making one of those points on how he can do the same sort of thing and just do it better while satirizing much of the hollow bragging that has colored that material in recent years. More on this in a bit. And while I appreciate that it's here instead of on a mainstream record, I'm not exactly wild when Drake uses those flows either. Doesn't exactly sound good for either of them. Now, to his credit, Kendrick Lamar's complicated lyricism often plays as well, if not better, on tracks with a bit more of a jazzy feel. One of the reasons I really dug Untitled 5 and 6, and he knows enough to bring on guest stars who can really compliment him here, with J-Rock and Punch setting up some great parallels on the former, and CeeLo Green, of all people, bringing some great low-key soul to the latter. But on the flip side, while I liked hearing SZA on Untitled 4, I do wish that track had been fleshed out a little bit more beyond the punchline that we later hear Kendrick create in the lo-fi final third of Untitled 7. And J-Rock singing on that song? Yeah, that's the reason I probably like that song the least. Now granted, some of that also comes through in the instrumentation and the production. And you know, only Kendrick will release a record that simultaneously has some great, fascinating production choices, and yet leave them intentionally unpolished enough to highlight the looseness of this project. Because let's be honest, many of these tracks do feel kind of skeletal, lacking that added lushness or orchestration to really send them over the top, but Kendrick and his producers do a lot regardless. I loved how the ominous slow build of Untitled 1 grew grew out of a slow, bassy R&B jam with live drums to the warping wateriness behind Kendrick's bars, to the wiry synth layers of Untitled 3, to the jazzy horns and pianos playing off the rich bass of Untitled 5. It almost felt like free jazz on that song with the prominent cymbals and fragmented melody, but it really came together and worked so well, especially when followed with a much more established groove in Untitled 6, with the muted keys swelling as the brisk percussion and strings. Hell, even the liquid funk of Untitled 8 managed to click for me, even if I do feel that could have used another change up in the beat to really connect with me. A good crescendo there really would have killed. But on the flip side, we also get the darker, harsher, more mainstream accessible hip-hop tracks, like the fluttering sax against the eerie keys on the bass-heavy Untitled 2, or the contorting synth on Untitled 7 that breaks into a great rattling melody against those scratchy drums before dissolving into lo-fi acoustics. I might not like the grooves out in these tracks as much as I like the jazzier side, but they still do connect. They sound good here. Now, the one instrumental I didn't really like, Untitled 4, which might have some muted Spanish guitar ebbing in and out against a primarily a cappella track, but that shrill key progression against the filters piled on J-Rock's voice in the latter half of the song just did not connect, at least for me. But really, it's a Kendrick Lamar album. We're here for the lyrics and themes, and let me say right out of the gate that in comparison with more cohesive projects, we only get snippets of what might pass for an arc on this album. And even with that, Untitled 8 leaves that progression feeling distinctly unfinished, with good ideas that refocus on the themes, but lacking that moment to really nail that finale vibe. But what is Kendrick trying to say with this? Well, much of this isn't that far outside his typical wheelhouse, holding a leadership position in the increasingly turbulent world of modern hip-hop, trying to keep away from his own darker instincts and the increasing allure of his wealth, and more than ever before, his increasingly complicated relationship with God. That particular element starts very early on the first track, which cribs generously from the book of Revelation from the Bible, but the underlying anxiety becomes apparent here, how Kendrick tries to dedicate his life and art to God, and yet is cast into doubt whether it's all worth it when another artist, when another person could debase himself for years, and yet with forgiveness, could still get into heaven. It feels kind of capricious to him and unfair. And from there, the record expands into defining what Kendrick really wants. He sees the increasing wealth and flossing from him and his crew in Untitled 2, and yet even as he thinks about switching it up to embrace it, using Drake's flows in order to drive the parallel home all the more, and yet in the final lines, it's revealed as just cheap and hollow. He knows that he's better than this. But Kendrick questions even that. What I've always loved about him, not just that his framing is not afraid to show the very flawed humanity beneath the surface, but then to show the consequences of his actions. Now this manifests best in Untitled 5, where his rage and grief at a corrupted system has him drive up to a representative of said system, maybe a lawyer, maybe a businessman, and yet at the sight of that person's child, he speeds away. It sets up a great parallel with Punch's and J-Rock's verses, as they all question morality in the face of depression or death, with Punch making it plain that it's their own hubris that needs to be punctured in order to see through that mirage of fear that holds them back from being better. And that's where the album gets into some fascinating territory, because Kendrick Lamar's overall goal of enlightenment is multifaceted, tied into the high power ideology that he never references directly, but underscores the arc of this album. It ties into the double entendre that runs through a few songs with "head is the answer," and balancing passion with the mind and self-respect. And yet, even despite his faith, it's never explicitly linked to God, which Kendrick questions more here than he has ever done before as that easy way out. And while he can sympathize on tracks like Untitled 8 for a girl who doesn't seem the same success while struggling through school when selling herself out would lead to a bigger reward, he counsels her to hold steady, only for her to flip the question right back at Kendrick. He doesn't know her, and question how his fast money in the rap game is any different than hers when she needs it to survive. But then the bigger picture snaps into place, and you realize that while Kendrick's been speaking to the black community, he's also talking to hip-hop as a whole. And one of my favorite lines on the entire album: in today's day and age, we practice the self-pity of taking the easy way out. Hell, it's one of the big reasons why Kendrick uses Drake's flows to paint him as the foil on Untitled 2 and 7, the guy who did sell out for greater success. And while the message to rise above and be better can be excruciating to live it, especially in a system cast against you, Kendrick's never frames himself as being above it all, because on some moral level, he is very much equivalent in that struggle. Now, can this message see it as a little bit broadly sketched or even a little bit preachy? In the former case, yeah, a bit, especially on the caricatured minorities on Untitled 3 or the mostly inessential Untitled 4, not my favorite song on the album. But given how Kendrick frames this record, he places himself under the same standard. And not only that, he shows how he's just as human and susceptible to failing. Not so much judgment he's making there, but empathy with everybody else. They're all in this together. And the fact that he was able to mine out so much thematic cohesion and power from a collection of leftovers, that's kind of incredible in its own right. Now, I'm not going to say that Untitled Unmastered is on the level of his best work. Again, it's not. And it doesn't really have the killer standouts to really push it over the top for me. There's no King Kunta or How Much a Dollar Cost or The Black or the Berry, but it is still great regardless, netting a very light 8 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. But really, you're looking for some of the more insightful and thought-provoking hip-hop in the industry, you already knew that. So check this out regardless. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I have to be honest, I was really conflicted on this record, so I'm going to try something new because I want to know what you guys say. So in the card that's going to be coming up right about now, where I actually have put in a poll with various options that allow you guys to rank the album. I'm curious where you guys all fall in. There's options between 9 and 10, 7 and 8, 5 and 6, 3 and 4, and 2 and 1. If you thought this was absolute garbage, but I'd be surprised if you would. And now, this for me is just more of a checking, and there's no 0 because, honestly, let's be on the positive side here a little more. I want to test to see how well this poll will work. If you guys like this idea, put a comment in suggesting more of this, because I want to see if I can roll this out and get more of your feedback on these videos specifically, and the albums in particular. I want to start the conversation here. But beyond that, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums you want me to cover in upcoming weeks, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.